It is the largest evangelical church in Mexico, with a significant number of temples right here in Southern California. La Luz Del Mundo, or the Light of the World, has a massive following in the Latino communities. But outside of that realm, not much was known about the church until the recent arrest of its charismatic leader at LAX on multiple counts of sexual abuse, including rape of a minor. LA Times reporter Brittany Mejia shed some light on the man behind this church that critics have compared to a cult. Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
When you were last here, you were about to catch a flight to go visit this town. Tell me what you found.
Right, yeah, so I headed to this neighborhood. Actually, even before I got there, I took a taxi and was asking about the church, just people who live in Mexico. And everyone immediately was telling me, oh, you know, so many rumors. If the apostle dreams of you, you have to sleep with him. And everything that was just, I was like, wow, I don't know what to expect. And as soon as I showed up, there were banners of his face everywhere. You know, inside the home, there were framed portraits of him. His initials were landscaped into the bushes. They sold his name on like bags and keychains and pins. Yeah, he was very much there, even though he wasn't physically there.
And this is in the Guadalajara region, correct?
Yes, it's actually where the church took root in like 1926. God is said to have spoken to his grandfather, Nason's grandfather, and told him, you know, this is a city where we're going to create this church or restore my church. Then it took root and they created this neighborhood, and everyone, it's like 7,000 people who live in Hermosa Provincia neighborhood in Guadalajara, and they're members of the church.
Well, tell me the mythology of the church. Tell me what their doctrine is.
They basically believe in a living apostle, you know, that was sent by God. So the grandfather, you know, God spoke to him, told him, you know, start this church. And then since then, it's kind of passed down the line, you know, to his son and then to the grandson. And their belief is just, they basically just are listening to the messages but that are within the Bible, but they're being guided by these living apostles.
What's the appeal? Because this is a very Catholic area, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Why would people make the switch?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is early on, from what I was hearing from experts, you know, a lot of people, it's a migrant church as well, so a lot of people were coming back from the US, you know, after the Great Depression, and were trying to find something, trying to find a message, and they found it in this church. They, you know, within the Catholic Church, it was seen as like, you were a little bit far removed as a parishioner. Here it was seen as like, you can connect with this apostle. You can be closer to someone who speaks to God.
But what authorities found in this church was evidence of human trafficking, evidence of the production of child pornography. Tell us about the case against these folks.
Right, so it's interesting because Nason, who is the current apostle, or, you know, so-called apostle, he has been accused of these things, and he actually was a minister here in LA. And in that time, they have, I think, like 4 or 5 victims that have come forward who they're basing this case upon. It's interesting because when I was in Hermosa Provincia, nobody would say that they believed it. Nobody would even consider the fact that he won't get out. Everyone's mindset is, these are false allegations, we've dealt with this before, because his father actually dealt with accusations as well in the 1990s. And so they're like, we've been subjected to this before. He's like Jesus, he, you know, who was tried and arrested and, you know, crucified, and he's going to be released. And so, you know, a lot of people don't believe it. On the other end, yeah, you have these victims, and we don't really know all of the details yet, but it looks like it's being alleged that there were members of the church who brought these young women to him, you know, who told them, you know, it was an honor basically to do these things for the apostle. You know, I interviewed so many residents of that neighborhood, so many who either grew up in the faith or converted because they were Catholic, and they decided, you know, this was what the church they wanted to be a part of. And all of them were like, especially the mothers who were like, I would never do that to my daughter if I felt like there was that risk that existed here. It's illogical, I would never do that. But at the same time, there's also a mindset, and it's evident that people have this feeling that like, whatever I can do to pay back the apostle for everything he's done for me and for my life, like I would do it.
This church now has a foothold here in Southern California. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
It's interesting. Before all this news came out, I wasn't as aware of the church, and I didn't realize what a presence they are. They have just a huge presence in Southern California. I mean, from the start, we had reporters going to Santa Ana to a church and going to East LA to a church. And I mean, he was a minister in San Diego, in the desert, you know, kind of moved around to different churches. And they just have a pretty large population here, and it makes sense. I mean, there's a big immigrant population who lives in Southern California.
So let's talk about the status of the case and what's next for them. Who's in custody, who's still at large?
So he's currently in custody, and then 2 other women who are members of the church as well. There's one person who's in the wind right now. They're still searching for him, and he's being held on $50 million bail. And it's so high because they feel like he would have the ability, or his followers would raise the money to get him out, and they don't want to risk that that would happen.
Trial date?
So July 15th, there is a next upcoming, and it's just part of the bail hearing, because they had a recent one and they decided to keep the bail amount the way it was, which his followers are hoping that they'll be able to get a lower bail for him.
So interesting, Brittany, and I'm glad you went down there to see for yourself. All right, thanks for sharing with us.
Thanks so much.